Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session at PlatformCon 2025. We are trying to ground the event not in the technology only, but in the business case for what is a new department. And let's be honest, budgets seem endlessly tight or not. There seems to be budgets, but not everyone is reaching them. And then platform engineering teams being the newest at a lot of companies, the newest team may have this, what I don't like to call a change management tactic of last hired, first fired. I'm sorry, last hired, first fired. Yeah. So on that hand, like an internal developer platform is supposed to be this idea that is a single pane of glass and kind of like a wordly map brings everyone to the table around the same idea, the understanding and maybe bridging that chasm between the business and tech teams. But a platform team also has to be able to advocate for its budget. And we know statistically platform engineers get a little more money than DevOps engineers. So they have to differentiate themselves for that as well. So today I'm brought together a team of 3 epic women in tech to help us figure it all out. Cornelia, Sarah, and then Rebecca, can you introduce yourselves and talk about your experience at this crux of the business and the platform together?
Sure, I'll start since you listed my name first. Hi, everyone. My name is Cornelia Davis. I am so delighted to be here with the three of you in the next 45 minutes or so. I have been doing this platform engineering thing for, gosh, close to 15 years. So that's right. Longer than platform engineering has actually been a term. A huge part of that experience comes from my time at Pivotal, where I worked on Cloud Foundry, which was arguably one of the first kind of developer platforms out there. And the way that we helped our customers be successful with it is we helped them develop platform engineering teams. We actually called it that then. It wasn't an industry term at the moment, but that is what we called it. And we actually helped organizations like T-Mobile, who were an ops team when we met them, self-identify as platform engineers by the time, like 3 or 4 years into their journey. So arguably that was a internal developer platform. I also spent time then moving over to Kubernetes, which gave me kind of an interesting perspective because Kubernetes, I think, is the reason that we, as an industry, had to realize this platform engineering vision. So, as a part of all of that, I was super involved in the DevOps community. I'm part of the programming committee for what was called the DevOps Enterprise Summit, so Gene Kim's premier conference every year. And these days, I'm a developer advocate at Temporal, which is not a platform engineering company. But as it turns out, that without even trying, that's one of the biggest use cases is that people use Temporal like platform teams use it for a number of different things. So that's about all I'll say about Temporal today, but that's where I'm at.
Great, thank you so much. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Definitely. So, hi, I'm Sarah Persov, and I'm thrilled to be here. I have not been in the industry as long as Cornelia, but I have, during my time in the industry, spent a lot of time in DevOps spaces, platform engineering spaces, and DevX in general. And my big focus for the last 4 years at Dojo has really been on DevX and a platform team and area, but with a slightly different twist where it's not just platform engineering and DevOps, but also services that can be shared to help reduce load, things like that. I'm also a big advocate for women in tech. I do a lot of public speaking for the women in tech side, and I'm really excited to be talking here because there aren't enough women in the platform space. So I'm always absolutely inspired when I do get to meet women such as yourselves in this space and hopefully learn from you as well.
Yes, this is about building tools for your own engineers and customers. And there are amazing women in the platform engineering space, but we always need more. And the empathy and the listening skills to build what your developers actually want, not what you think they should. Rebecca, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yes, so I'm also really happy to be here today. So thank you for inviting me and including me. And so I am the field CTO at Swarmia. Swarmia is a company that builds a software engineering intelligence platform that is often used by platform teams or to inform platform teams' work. So in my current role, I spend a lot of time talking to other engineering leaders to understand their challenges. And kind of try to have a viewpoint of not what they will need now, but what they will need in the next 12, 18, 24 months. And then helping the team at Swarmia, I don't do any of the actual building, but kind of helping inform what we build and what our product roadmap looks like. So prior to that, I was at Stripe in their developer productivity organization. And then prior to that, I was at Indeed in their developer productivity organization, although we didn't call it that at the time. And I have kind of been around this space since before I knew it was a space. I grew up in the JavaScript and front end world and spent a lot of time over there emphasizing developer experience and improving the developer experience of building JavaScript front ends. So yeah, I guess at this point you could say I've been in this for more than 10 years at least, but arguably quite a bit longer depending on how you count. So anyway, that's me.
Absolutely. It's interesting because each of you have some sort of experience around developer experience, and we're talking about that when that is even more so, I would say, than platform engineering, one of those roles, the external DevRel, because developers hate being marketed to. So how do you market to them? You actually help them. And that is one of those jobs that were first on the chopping block. But it seems that platform engineering is a little less on the chopping block, knock on wood, because there's proven value around it, which is crazy because I think we all agree there's definitely proven value around developer relations as well, just maybe figuring out how to measure the value of it. Yeah. So with that in mind.
Yeah, I would kind of set aside the developer relations bit that just happens to be my job right now, but I more want to come here and talk today about my experience. And the reason I have the job I have today is because of the experience I have working around these developer productivity efforts at other companies.
I think it's definitely important having that experience. So how do you go about, in order to make the business case, which is an internal business case for this department that is servicing your developers, how do we think we go about making that? So how do you start measuring the impact of your platform engineering strategy? Because you can't improve what you can't measure, and you can't get the budget for things you can't measure usually. So how do you go about measuring the impact of your platform engineering strategy?
I think first you have to understand what the platform team is even trying to solve, because it's, it may be making it easier to run the stuff on Kubernetes, or it may be to make it easier for CI/CD to run, or to make it easier to write tests, or to migrate from this old janky library or framework to this new one, or something like that. So I think that you can't start from how do I prove the value. You have to start from what is the value I plan to provide, right? Like you have to start from, and you can do that by talking to your engineers, running a survey, that kind of thing. And they'll tell you what's holding them back. And then from there, you can start to evaluate what's the value to the business of fixing this. The bigger your engineering organization is, the easier that problem is, that question is to answer. If you're working with 2,000 engineers and you do something that saves them 5 minutes a day, that's a lot of time in a year. And so it may be harder in a smaller organization, but eventually it just becomes that it's simple math that saving engineers time is valuable and reducing their interruptions, reducing their points of frustration.
I always think that sorry.
No, please go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the biggest things always with measuring the impact, and Rebecca, you're right, we need to know what are we trying to impact, right, is not just feedback on satisfaction and DevX and usability and all that, but actually talking to the product managers, talking to the non-engineering parts of the teams. because I think once you can connect with them properly and that it clicks with them, that if you invest in platform engineering, if you invest in that platform team, that they get delivery faster, they get feedback faster, they can improve their costs, and it becomes a bit of a multiplier effect. It's not just, okay, the engineers are spending 20 minutes less a day on, you know, flaky tests or the infrastructure or whatever. It is also enabling them to like focus on that business logic. The better you streamline things, the more advanced that platform engineering team is, and they can provide SDKs, they can help provide ways for teams to not have to worry about a test framework, to not have to think about the infrastructure, not have to learn Terraform, things like that, right? If the product people understand that and the leaders of those teams understand that, they then help advocate for you as well. And it's this multiplier effect that once you kind of get it across in a way that is digestible for them, that not only are you improving costs by reducing time spent and reducing distraction and reducing context switching, but also the delivery is faster, and also they can focus more on the niche problems, and they can actually focus on what they're meant to be building instead of the skeleton around it and the frameworks and the infrastructure and all that jazz.
Yeah. I love both those perspectives. And when we talk about developer platforms, we think about the developer. I mean, it's in the name. So platform engineering teams are about empowering developers. But to me, platform engineering, there's two elements. There's the element of empowering developers and making them more efficient, and so simplifying the tasks that they need to do. But there's an equally important thing, which is that the platform engineering teams are responsible for doing that while still delivering on the enterprise requirements around security, compliance, cost management. And so when it comes to kind of measuring the impact, we also need to measure that side of it. Yes, all of the developer things, but for example, how long does it take you to handle a vulnerability in your platform? So if you've done your platform engineering right, then it's not each one of the development teams that are all independently doing that. You've set up the platform in such a way that you can provide that as a service, basically, operating system CVEs, or even in the app tier, there's clever ways that you can do that. And so in my experience, that's certainly one of the ways that you can impact is you have to measure both the developer productivity and the developer happiness and things like that, but also the enterprise controls.
Yeah. And I think it's those things that can be, there's lots of stuff in platform engineering that is very difficult to measure. So, we introduced a new security framework that's going to make everything better for you as soon as you add it to your application, because we're not going to do that for you. Well, that can have a very different impact than, and we did it for you, and now we can see that but it's also so difficult to prove. We would call them, indeed, we call them non-events. Like proving that something didn't happen is often that's often the value that a platform team provides, is that something didn't happen. And I think that those can be some of the most challenging things to communicate about when something didn't happen. So I also think that everything you both said is totally correct. And the time savings, I gravitate toward it because it's something that leaders can understand, because we can convert it into dollars. And so it is like this hyper simplified thing, but sometimes that is the thing. If I saved 2 minutes for every developer, for every build, for every day, those numbers talk, even if that's not the biggest impact that my team is actually having. Real impact of the platform team should be to change the way that people work for the better.
What about retention?
Sorry.
Is anyone measuring retention on their platforms, or adoption of platforms, but retention at their company? Or is that too far off the scope?
I want to hear somebody else first.
Oh, sorry.
No, go.
I wouldn't say that if we're talking about retention in general, do they stay in the company? I would say that often people leave companies for bigger reasons: management, culture, how comfortable they are they being challenged, are they growing, money, compensation in general, But I definitely think that when you take the step back and you think about what we're fundamentally doing is trying to make their lives easier so they can focus on what they want to focus on, it has an impact. But I think measuring that, when people do exit interviews, half the time people aren't even honest in exit interviews, let alone say, well, I had flaky tests and it was driving me mad. That's the type of thing of the straw that broke a camel's back, not an actual leading reason from at least my experience and the people I speak to. And,
so I think retention is really interesting. And also I think the way that we value retention has implicitly changed in the last 5 years, right? Like retention was an at all costs thing in 2020, and it's not nearly the same as it was. So I think, and I do think, like at Stripe, we did a migration from Flow to TypeScript that was like a pretty significant effort. One of the reasons was retention. People couldn't believe that it was 2022 and they had to be writing JavaScript using this library that no one else used. And so we couldn't point and say, like, because we did this, Joe stayed, right? But we could say that the sentiment among our front-end engineers was radically different after we made that change.
Yeah. I want to share a little anecdote. So back in the Pivotal days, there was a time period where I was running a small group. There were about a half a dozen or 8 or 10 of us. And my boss at the time, James Waters, who is kind of a luminary in the Cloud Foundry space, challenged me. And he said, I challenge you to hire somebody away from Netflix. And I was like, challenge accepted. And you have to realize that this was back in like 2015, 2016, when Netflix was the place to be. Why was it the place to be? Because they had a great platform. We didn't call it a developer platform at the time, but they had the practices that empowered developers. They had a great set of tools that just made them happy and flow. And so the TLDR is I never succeeded at that. I accepted the challenge and I failed miserably and I knew people at Netflix and I would reach out to them personally and they would be like, great to hear from you. Hell no. It's so great here. And money didn't matter and nothing else mattered. They were just happy. They spent every day being in that kind of flow state and joyous state. And so platforms matter for retention. I believe they very much do. And I loved your story as well, Rebecca. Totally.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And quantify it. Lol.
Yeah. It's definitely, yeah.
I think that's the thing. It adds to how comfortable they are. It adds to, it is fundamental for how much they enjoy actually doing their job without having those distractions, without having to context switch, without having to try and Google. And now you get, Google AI giving you the wrong answers on what things you need in Terraform and this and that. And it's one of those things that, I've said, and I've had other people say, people like to pretend that platform isn't there until something goes wrong. Well, as soon as something goes wrong, every single person in that company knows about platform and it should have been fixed in this and that. But ideally, you don't want them to almost know about it, except for the fact that we're helping them and we're making life easier and we're making their, stuff more reliable, more secure. We can, all the different things that we do, but we want to make it comfortable and, as you said, happy. If you're happy in your job and you feel like you can actually do what you were hired to do and what you want to do for your own growth, for your own soul, you're less likely to leave. And people
And
often don't take into account how critical platform is for that.
Yeah.
And you're more likely to do good work if you're
Yeah.
happy.
of course.
Yeah, you're more likely to do more good work.
And you're more likely to feel successful sooner, which is another measurement of a platform that we haven't spoken about, but the idea of onboarding, because it's very frustrated to go to a company and then even waiting a week to get the right computer that you need, that is what they allow you to do. By the time, if it takes you 6 weeks or 8 weeks to be fully onboarded and successful, that's frustrating. You're not able to feel incapable of your own good work, and you feel a lack of confidence. And I do agree with you, Sarah. Let's be honest. The number one reason people leave jobs, I'm sure, is their boss. It's still, you hear statistics. I would love that number, but HR usually thinks it's money. It's usually bosses. But that being said, what you did say, Cornelia, about Netflix, when I interviewed Catherine Kohler, who was in an awesome developer productivity panel from last year's Platform Con. She heads the Netflix developer productivity engineering team. Their questions in their developer survey include some really specific ones around sentiment around tooling. Do you find the tooling delightful? If you were to leave Netflix, would you be sad to leave the tooling behind? Would you recommend your friends work at Netflix because the tooling is so good? How effective do you feel in your job because of your tooling? How frequently can you deploy and feel confident about what you're deploying? How buggy do you think the tooling is? That does seem like that is end goals, and people listening to this conversation may be on still arguing to get that funding for it. But with those questions may be about tooling, but they're really about how your developers feel. And it really comes, those questions will not be asked. Maybe the how frequently you can deploy, but the rest of those questions would not be asked at a company that is not psychologically safe and doesn't have the basis. So I think what we're talking about is, yeah, you have to have the basis, and then what can you do? So I think that's very important. So just as we're starting to wind down, what are those questions you should be asking that lead to the right developer metrics, that lead to the business, the cultural, the psychological safety, the developer experience use cases that have you building the right platform?
Something that I think is always really important when answering questions like this, and I think it also really depends on the size of your company, right? If you've got thousands of engineers, you have to go for forms, you have to go for more or less personal. But when you're in a smaller company, what I find is that the most critical thing is actually knowing your colleagues and your engineers, right? I definitely have come across times where I'm trying to get feedback and I've given out a form and it's anonymous and I'll get more honest feedback, and it's not anonymous and they don't want to do it. Or you go and you do a discovery interview and they feel it's too formal and that it's going to be potentially come back to bite them. Whereas there are times where I've had engineers where I've been like, you know what, let's go get a coffee, have a chat. And honestly, most of the time, that's when I get the most important and critical feedback, because you're taking away the formality of it. You're getting the honesty from them that ties back into that psychological safety. If people don't feel psychologically safe to be honest, or they're worried that, oh, if I say the wrong thing, you know, you guys aren't going to help, or whatever way people feel, you're not going to get the right goals, or not the right goals, sorry, but the right outcome of that feedback. And that fundamentally is going to also then shape your roadmap and shape what you're focusing on and shape what you're working on. So the psychological safety around that is critical. If you don't have psychological safety, I to an extent don't think what you ask matters that much, because you're not actually going to get honest and useful information out of it.
Yeah, so I'll chime in there. I mean, one of the things that I think is the most critical is really fundamentally in product management. So without a product management role for your, without a product owner or product manager for your platform, what is your mechanism for feedback? And so what we're really talking about here is setting up a framework that allows for that feedback to happen correctly. And so and I love the point that you made, Sarah, about the size of the organization. I think that matters as well. But one of the things that I think is super critical is that as a part of product management, yes, we might have 1,000 users or 10,000 users or 100,000 users, but we do have user sessions where we get back feedback. We watch them use the product. And those types of things. These are kind of classical product management techniques that you use to build out the product. It's all about getting that feedback. I think that is super critical. And the other thing that I love about product management is that what we tend to do, if we don't think of it as a product management function, then we can end up with just a backlog of requests. But to me, it turns into a product when you start to have a roadmap. It's backlog and roadmap are not interchangeable. They're not one and the same. The backlog is all of the stuff that you might do. The roadmap is what you're promising. And so having that mechanism where you're like, here's the roadmap for the product. Here are the things that I know you've been asking for connectivity into this kind of database at the back end. Here's where it sits on the roadmap. And then, of course, there's the whole advocacy on helping people be successful with the tools that you have. But I really think that taking a product-oriented mindset is one of the ways that you can ask the right questions.
I can't I can't agree enough, and it was so transformative at my job at Indeed to have a product manager, so much that I decided I'm going to be a product manager for a little while. It was very inspirational what he was able to do. And I was like,
and Rebecca, can I interject here with a specific question? Because when you were introducing yourself and you said at Indeed, we had a developer productivity or a developer experience team, but we didn't call it that. I think that's where you're going right now. So maybe you can say a little bit more. What did you call it? And how did that happen?
Oh, how that happened is its own whole story. We called it engineering capabilities, and then eventually I think they changed into internal platforms or something like that. And so I was there at the meeting where before the meeting this didn't exist, and then after the meeting this did exist. And it was just a meeting kind of laying out all the opportunity that was on the table if we were to consolidate a lot of efforts that were going on around the business. So, we didn't call it productivity, but that was the goal. And one of our biggest, KPIs was what we call delivery lead time. So it was very much that it was very much a productivity effort, even though that wasn't the name on the box. What I wanted to add to what you said, though, Cornelia, is that I love to say that you already have a developer ecosystem product, whether you want to have one or not. It's already happened, and it happened as soon as you hired your second developer, and they did something different from the first developer. Now you have an ecosystem, and it is not owned, and therefore it will go the route of any product that is not owned. But recognizing you have a product, it has users, and you built it without any product thinking, and now here you are. And what now? I think product partner has such an enormous influence. Also around the goal setting and being able to speak in the language of goal setting that the business is going to appreciate. I got so much value out of working with a product manager who could help me interface with the business.
I guess the only thing I think of is, and so many of these cuts that have happened over the last couple of years, they've been cutting external product researchers and product owners and developer advocates. So how do you make the business case for internally having someone or training someone that is in a platform engineering role, getting them the training to do things like developer research, internal developer research, or platform as a product activities like creating a roadmap? how do you advocate that business use case for that funding? Because that is something that is maybe potentially a whole new headcount.
I would say it's easier to do when you have a platform team of 4 people than when you have a platform team of 200 people. And so the size of the delta influences the path. Like, I think at the beginning, it's just explaining, like I just said, that the ecosystem is a product. It has users, and we, like, when we're building products for users, we have product managers. And so I think that's a much easier case to make when you're building the team the first time, because it's just like somebody, like, in explaining the direct parallels between, a public facing product and an internal product. We are building a product for internal platform teams, not just for them, for like lots of use cases, but we are, and you better believe we have product managers working on the tools that we're building, which are not dissimilar from the kinds of tools that a platform team might be building. And they're also going to want to have not just product, but UX. The contributions that our UX designers make are enormous. And I think at a like Stripe, we had one product manager over the entire dev prod organization. And he may have even been like one layer above that. So we didn't meaningfully have product managers. And very honestly, that was not a fight I was well positioned to fight at the time. So I was my own product manager and kind of showed others that was possible.
Sorry.
I'll chime in here real quick with another anecdote, and this one is well known. So I love what you said earlier, Rebecca, about as soon as you have somebody who comes second developer, they do things differently. And this kind of goes back to, I want to come back to the argument that I had earlier around, yes, all of the developer productivity stuff is really nice. And in my experience, enterprises are like, sure, we want our developers to be more productive, but we have all of these other concerns. We have all of these other things that we need to fund. So here's the example. So I mentioned Cloud Foundry earlier. So Cloud Foundry abstracted away a tremendous amount of the enterprise concerns, and we trained our platform engineering teams to implement all of those compliance and security things. Kubernetes comes along and cloud platforms come along, and we say, oh, we want to get out of the way of developers. We're going to let developers have access to these tools. And we don't have a product team that is figuring out where the value line is, what belongs within the developer, concerns, and what belongs beneath the developer concerns. So what happens? Well, Capital One, back in, I think it was roughly 2019 or something like that, had a critical vulnerability that exposed PII of over 100 million users, right? And what was it? It was an IAM role that was improperly configured. And it was because there was no product function that went through and decided that, you know what, IAM privileges are so critical that we want to make sure that those things are controlled and that we don't expose that to the developer. The developer, imagine how horrible the developer felt when they found out that their IAM configuration caused this vulnerability. And so now let's take it back to cost. What did that cost them? Putting reputational stuff aside, which that's super hard to quantify, although there's probably economists who can do that. But the brass tacks was almost $250 million in fines and lawsuits that Capital One had to pay out. 250 million bucks. So using arguments like that to argue for a team to create a platform that's going to avoid those type of vulnerabilities, I found that to be a far more effective way to get the budget. Is not to just ask for developer joy and happiness, but like these real things that you can affect dollar wise.
And also talk about the cost of deploying that patch across all these individually managed containers versus to be able to do it through a platform driven system.
Yep.
So I actually, when I was leading the platform team, really fought for actually a few years to get a PM. And it was always, oh, you're just serving internal, it's not a product. The type of stuff that I was focusing on was a lot more overtly product than some of the other teams were working on, where I was building services and middlemen, like centralized services to streamline stuff, right? But the biggest thing was I am employed as an engineering team lead. I have people management, I have architecture, I have roadmaps, I have all of those different things. I am not a product manager. I am not a good product manager, and I can 100% say that. But also, I'm already wearing multiple hats. Like, as we are, you're talking about the cups and cutting stuff, but they're also consolidating the roles. All those requirements of all these different roles that they used to have and have cut, those requirements haven't gone. They're still there. It's just you're expecting more and more of every layer of management. And one of the biggest things was I can go out, I can spend my time, I can interview, I can, analyze stuff. I can do all of these different things, but something has to give. There's only so many hours in a day. And I'm not a specialist at this. I'm not trained in this. I'm winging it. And sometimes I'll be right. Sometimes I'll be wrong. But if you want the actual cost benefit to be realized, we need somebody who's an expert in getting this information, in doing that research, in understanding how to maximize and multiply those benefits. And one of the big things was I tried to explain, like, I can look at the current state, I can do, a RAG system, I can look at, how confident are people to ship, all these different things. But I don't have the skills to actually analyze the speed and analyze the cost. I don't have the, I'm not in a role that I can actually look at some of this data because it's protected. You want me to do an analysis of, okay, I improve, every engineer in these X number of teams by X number of time, and what is the cost benefit of that? I, as a team lead, don't have access to that because I'm not their manager. And having somebody who is connected and separate but has the ability to connect with the product managers, where there is always that, or at least from my experience, you're going to product managers as the platform engineer, as the team lead, they expect you to want something from them, if that makes sense. Whereas when I finally got a product manager, the relationships were completely different. Instantly, we got the information we needed. It was a complete night and day. And it's so important that when you are growing, and I agree, it's much easier if you start with, when you're first starting, these are the requirements for a team. But often, especially for a scale up or a startup, you don't have that planning, you don't have that foresight. It's grow, grow, grow. And then all of a sudden you find yourself with a group of teams with no product. And you need to take stock as a business and go, okay, well, we want to reduce the costs of blah. Well, the easiest way of doing that is by making our infrastructure cheaper. We need somebody to be able to actually do the analysis and understand the product and the impact on the external customers as well. And I think that's always a really important, circling it back around, because when, at least for my experience, has been building for my own engineers, right? I'm building products for them to use to enable them and empower them to build for external customers. We still are connected, but having somebody who can actually explain that in a business-friendly way makes all the difference.
I do want to add that I think absolutely the ideal is to have this product manager person, no doubt. And in the absence of that person, that doesn't mean that the engineering manager doesn't have responsibilities to still deliver the right thing. And so they may need to learn some of those skills. And if they're shut out of systems, they need to maybe figure out how to get. So I've seen that a lot of platform engineering leaders and engineering leaders in general, they spend a lot of time doing analysis, so another story from Stripe, we had a team that did the IAM, and it was like the LDAP management system, is what it was called. And that team had built a system that was exactly to spec. Like it did exactly what they had designed it to do. It worked exactly like it was supposed to. And then 2 years later, a year later, we went and did what you said, Cornelia, watched people building software, and we found that people had created such granular permissions in the system that you were constantly like one step forward, two steps back. You would get a permission, and then you would need another one. Get a permission, then you need another one. Because that team had never talked to their users, that team had no idea that there was this frustration, because the system worked exactly like it was supposed to. And all of their dashboards looked exactly like they were supposed to. And so...
Did you say that they didn't speak to their users, if they didn't do any form of iterative feedback loop? You know,
I wasn't on the team when they did the work, so I can't, I'm not sure I was at Stripe, but I certainly wasn't on the team that did the work. But what was very clear when we did bring this feedback to them, they said, oh my God, this is so useful. We've never heard any of this before.
Yep.
And so, and this is a real problem in platform teams where they build exactly what they said they would very well.
Yeah.
And then they build something else.
And you know what, where I thought you were going to go with that was, I thought you were going to say there was actually an interface in that system that would have allowed the developers to be much more effective, not do things at the granular level. You didn't go there, but this, when I thought you were going there, I was thinking developer advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Because just because you make a service available in your platform doesn't mean that people are just going to read the APIs and know what the best practices are. And that's where developer advocacy comes in, is like understanding the pain points. Like developer advocacy, a lot of what their primary role is to reduce friction, is to understand the friction. So even a developer advocate can be somebody who, if there isn't a product manager, but there's a developer advocate as a part of that team who's out there helping those groups use that tool, they might find, oh, there's a point of friction here. So developer advocates aren't one way, they're two way.
Mm-hmm.
So they're also bringing those points of friction back into the engineering team. So even without a product manager, to your point, Rebecca, if they had somebody who brought back that information, they would have been in a position to change it.
Yeah. It doesn't need to be a product manager.
Yeah.
It sure is nice.
It sure is nice.
And I think we can all agree as we wrap up that none of this can happen without that psychological safety, because you cannot make measurable impact that measurably benefits employees without employees feeling safe to provide feedback about their own lived experience.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Very true.
I would like to thank you, Rebecca, Sarah, and Cornelia, for this conversation. And thank you, PlatformCon, for joining us. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the event. And I'll see y'all in London tomorrow. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much.